It was a chilly dawn in Stonebridge Valley, where the mist rolled in like a blanket over the jagged cliffs and dense woods. A group of 4 friends, Amir, Daniel, Saeed, and Yusuf, stood near the edge of a rocky outcrop, staring down at the steep descent into the valley below. The valley was infamous, shrouded in tales of strange disappearances and unsettling echoes that mimicked human voices. But the stories had never dissuaded them. For years, the group had sought out challenges. They had climbed perilous mountains, explored abandoned mines, and even navigated underground rivers. This time, their destination was an old, abandoned monastery deep in Stonebridge Valley, rumored to hold secrets that no one had dared to uncover. "This is it," said Amir, the de facto leader of the group. His sharp features and unflinching gaze were a source of confidence for the others. "You sure about this?" Saeed asked, adjusting the straps of his backpack. He was the most cautious of the group, always thinking 2 steps ahead. "You're not backing out now, are you?" Daniel teased, his voice dripping with mockery. He thrived on risks, always the first to dive headfirst into danger. "I'm not backing out," Saeed replied. "I just don't want to end up as one of the stories people tell to scare their kids." Yusuf chuckled, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Daniel's fiery personality. "Relax, we'll stick together, and we'll be fine." The group began their descent into the valley, the air growing colder as they ventured further. The path was treacherous, littered with loose stones and thick roots. The forest around them was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. As they reached the valley floor, the abandoned monastery loomed in the distance. Its crumbling stone walls and collapsed roof hinted at centuries of decay. Surrounding it were broken statues, their faces eroded by time, and a dried-up fountain in the center of what was once a courtyard. "Looks like nobody's been here for ages," Yusuf remarked, running his hand over a moss-covered pillar. "That's the point," Amir said, stepping through the arched entrance. Inside, the monastery was a labyrinth of dark hallways and empty chambers. The air was damp, carrying the faint scent of mildew and stone. The group's flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing faded murals on the walls and scattered debris on the floor. "Check this out," Daniel said, stopping in front of a mural. It depicted robed figures holding lanterns, standing in a circle around a large stone. Beneath the image was an inscription in an ancient script. "What do you think it means?" Saeed asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Probably some ritual or something," Amir said, dismissing it with a wave. "Let's keep moving." They ventured deeper into the monastery, eventually finding a staircase that spiraled downward into what appeared to be a basement. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed in the distance. At the bottom of the staircase, they found themselves in a vast chamber. In the center stood a massive stone pedestal, its surface engraved with intricate patterns. Resting atop it was a spherical object, about the size of a basketball, emitting a faint bluish glow. "What is that?" Yusuf asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Looks like it's been here for a long time," Saeed said, hesitating to step closer. "Only one way to find out," Daniel said, reaching for the sphere. "Wait!" Amir shouted, stopping him mid-reach. "We don't know what it is or what it does." Daniel rolled his eyes. "It's just a rock. What's the worst that could happen?" Ignoring Amir's warning, Daniel picked up the sphere. The moment his hands made contact, the chamber was filled with a low hum. The engravings on the pedestal began to glow, and the air seemed to vibrate with energy. "What did you do?" Saeed demanded, his voice panicked. Before Daniel could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. The walls of the chamber shifted, revealing hidden passageways on either side. From the darkness emerged figures, men made of stone, their eyes glowing with the same bluish light as the sphere. "They're moving!" Yusuf shouted, backing away. The stone figures advanced slowly, their heavy footsteps echoing through the chamber. Amir grabbed a piece of debris from the floor and swung it at the nearest figure. The blow shattered the stone man's arm, but it kept moving. "Run!" Amir shouted. The group sprinted toward one of the passageways, the stone figures close behind. The narrow corridor twisted and turned, and the sound of their pursuers grew fainter with each step. Eventually, they emerged into another chamber, this one smaller and more ornate. In the center of the room was another pedestal, this one holding a carved tablet. Around it were 4 statues of robed figures, their hands raised as if in warning. "Is it safe?" Saeed asked, catching his breath. "We don't have much choice," Amir said, stepping toward the pedestal. The tablet was inscribed with symbols similar to those on the sphere, along with a series of illustrations. It seemed to depict a sequence of events, a group of men finding the sphere, awakening the stone figures, and then using the tablet to subdue them. "This must be the key," Amir said, studying the tablet. "How do we use it?" Daniel asked, still clutching the sphere. "There's something written here," Yusuf said, pointing to an inscription at the bottom. "It's a riddle," Saeed said after a moment. "To silence the echoes, the light must return to its source." "What does that mean?" Daniel asked, his frustration evident. Amir thought for a moment. "The pedestal where we found the sphere. It must be the source." "Then we need to go back," Yusuf said. "Are you crazy?" Saeed asked. "Those things are still out there." "If we don't, we'll never get out of here," Amir said firmly. Reluctantly, the group retraced their steps, the glowing sphere lighting their path. The stone figures were nowhere to be seen, but the tension in the air was palpable. When they reached the original chamber, the pedestal's engravings were still glowing. "Put it back," Amir said. Daniel hesitated, but eventually placed the sphere back on the pedestal. The low hum returned, and the glowing patterns shifted, forming a spiral that seemed to draw the light inward. The stone figures reappeared, this time standing motionless around the edges of the room. "It's working," Saeed whispered. The chamber was bathed in a brilliant light, and the stone figures crumbled into dust. The glowing patterns on the pedestal faded, and the sphere dimmed until it was nothing more than a dull, gray rock. "Is it over?" Yusuf asked, his voice trembling. "I think so," Amir said, though his expression remained cautious. The group exited the monastery, the morning sun breaking through the mist as they climbed out of the valley. The silence that had once felt oppressive now seemed peaceful, as if the valley itself had been freed from a long-standing curse. "What was that place?" Saeed asked, glancing back at the crumbling structure. "A warning," Amir said. "Some things are better left undisturbed." As they walked back to Stonebridge, the group was unusually quiet. Each of them knew they would never forget the echoes of the valley and the lesson they had learned about the dangers of curiosity. Deep in the heart of the rugged mountains, there lay a treacherous path known to locals as the Whispering Caves Trail. It was named not for whispers of wind or water, but for the strange murmurs that echoed from the network of caves. The tales surrounding them varied. Some said the caves held lost treasure, while others whispered of men who entered and never returned. Ahmed, Zubair, Kamal, and Fahad, 4 lifelong friends, stood at the trail's entrance, their breaths visible in the frosty morning air. They had come from the nearby town of Marjan, driven by curiosity and a thirst for adventure. "Still think this is a good idea?" Kamal asked, his eyes scanning the dense forest ahead. "It's the only idea," Ahmed replied, grinning. He was the most daring of the group, his confidence often bordering on recklessness. "We've been hearing about these caves since we were kids," Fahad added. "It's time someone figured out what's inside." Zubair, the quietest of the group, nodded. He wasn't one to speak much, but his calm, calculating demeanor made him the natural strategist. The trail was narrow and steep, snaking through the dense pine forest. The sun barely penetrated the thick canopy, casting long shadows over the rocky terrain. The group moved cautiously, their hiking boots crunching against loose gravel. After 2 hours of hiking, they reached a clearing where the first cave loomed before them. Its entrance was wide and gaping, like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. "This is it," Ahmed said, his voice echoing faintly. "Not too late to turn back," Kamal joked, though the tension in his voice betrayed his nerves. "No one's backing out now," Ahmed said, stepping inside. The cave was cold and damp, the air heavy with the scent of earth and moss. The walls glistened with moisture, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed around them. They switched on their headlamps, the beams cutting through the darkness. As they moved deeper, the whispers began. "Did you hear that?" Fahad asked, stopping abruptly. "Hear what?" Ahmed replied, glancing over his shoulder. "Voices," Fahad said, "like someone's talking." "It's probably the wind," Zubair said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. They pressed on, the whispers growing louder. It wasn't a single voice, but a cacophony of murmurs, as if dozens of people were speaking at once. The words were unintelligible, but the sound was unmistakable. "This is getting weird," Kamal said, his eyes darting around. "We've come this far," Ahmed said. "Let's see it through." The tunnel opened into a massive chamber, its walls covered in strange markings. Symbols and patterns were etched into the stone, glowing faintly in the dim light of their headlamps. "What is this place?" Fahad asked, running his hand over the carvings. "Looks ancient," Zubair said, studying the symbols. "Maybe some kind of script?" In the center of the chamber stood a large stone pedestal. Resting on it was an object that immediately drew their attention. A crystal, about the size of a football, glowing with a soft, pulsing light. "Do you think it's valuable?" Kamal asked, his eyes fixed on the crystal. "Only one way to find out," Ahmed said, reaching for it. "Wait," Zubair interjected. "We don't know what it is or what it does." "It's a rock," Ahmed said, shrugging off the warning. "What's the worst that could happen?" The moment Ahmed touched the crystal, the chamber trembled. The markings on the walls flared to life, their glow intensifying. The whispers became a roar, filling the air with an overwhelming noise. "Ahmed, what did you do?" Fahad shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. Before Ahmed could answer, the ground beneath them shifted. Sections of the chamber's floor sank, revealing deep, dark pits. From the shadows emerged humanoid figures, their forms flickering like smoke, but solid enough to block the group's path. "Run!" Zubair shouted, leading the charge back toward the tunnel. The shadowy figures pursued them, their movements unnaturally fast. The group stumbled through the narrow passage, the glowing light of the markings casting eerie shadows. "Don't look back!" Kamal yelled, his voice shaking. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, but they finally burst out into the open air. Gasping for breath, they turned to see if the figures had followed. To their relief, the cave's entrance was empty. "What was that?" Fahad asked, collapsing onto the ground. "Something we shouldn't have disturbed," Zubair said, glaring at Ahmed. "I didn't know this would happen," Ahmed protested. "We need to put it back," Zubair said, his voice firm. Ahmed reluctantly pulled the crystal from his backpack. "Fine, but we need a plan." They spent the next hour strategizing. Zubair suggested they use the crystal's light to distract the figures while they returned it to the pedestal. Kamal volunteered to create a diversion, using flares they had packed for emergencies. As the sun set, the group re-entered the cave. The whispers resumed, louder and more menacing than before. "Stick together," Zubair said, leading the way. When they reached the chamber, the figures reappeared, their forms swirling like smoke. Kamal lit a flare and tossed it to the side, drawing the figures' attention. "Now!" Zubair shouted. Ahmed and Fahad rushed to the pedestal while Zubair and Kamal held the figures at bay. As soon as the crystal was returned to its place, the chamber fell silent. The markings dimmed, and the figures vanished. "Let's get out of here," Kamal said, his voice shaking. They hurried back to the surface, the weight of the experience settling over them. "Next time, let's stick to hiking," Fahad said, breaking the silence. The others laughed, the tension finally lifting. As they walked back to Marjan, they couldn't shake the feeling that the cave was watching them, its whispers lingering in their minds.